Hola chicas, en este video les voy a explicar algo nuevo. Es la versión pasada del subjuntivo. Ustedes aprendieron la versión del subjuntivo, que es la versión en el presente, pero hay una versión en el pasado también y no es difícil. Por ejemplo, yo voy a escribir pasado de subjuntivo, también se llama el plusquamperfecto. El plusquamperfecto se llama también. Por ejemplo, si ustedes tienen una frase, yo quiero que tú bailes. Es una frase en el subjuntivo, ¿no? Yo quiero que es el indicador, it's the trigger, the indicator. Y bailes es en el subjuntivo, pero es en el subjuntivo de presente. Si el verbo en el indicador fuera en el pasado y si no fuera en el presente, si yo dijera yo quería, no yo quiero, yo quería que tú, el verbo aquí no sería bailes, sería diferente. ¿Qué son las terminaciones de los verbos? Bueno, para los verbos AR, estos son las terminaciones. Ara, aras, ara es similar al subjuntivo porque la forma yo y la forma él, ella, usted son iguales, son lo mismo. Aramos, arais, no acento, aran. No acento aquí tampoco. No. Pero en la forma nosotros sí, aramos. Y ER e IR tienen las mismas terminaciones. Hiera, hieras, hiera, hieramos, hierais, hieran. So going back to our example sentence here, what would our verb be? The verb bailar is an AR verb, and in the to form. So we would say bailarás. Yo quiero que tú bailes, pero yo quería que tú bailaras. Yo quería que tú bailaras. And so the rules for subjunctive are exactly the same. It's just that you're going to use these endings if ever the verb in the trigger is in the past tense, in one of the two past tenses. So you could say, I doubted that, like in the moment, yo dudé, and that would be preterite. So this quería, this is in the imperfect. But if the verb in the trigger were the preterite instead of the imperfect, that doesn't change anything. Thankfully, there's not a separate set of endings for when the verb in the trigger is imperfect versus when it's preterite, because that would be a lot to keep in mind. So now this tense also has another use besides being the past version of the subjunctive. This is also the tense that would be used with si, like if. So if somebody did something, if something happened. So I want to give you a few example sentences for you to put in your notes. And in these example sentences, there are going to be some ifs, and some of them will be some of them will be this tense being used because it's the past version of the subjunctive. Okay, so let's do the first one. Miguel no está cierto de que ella le no estaba. Miguel no estaba cierto de que ella le amara. Pobre Miguel. Miguel no estaba cierto de que ella le amara. Okay, not being certain of something is a trigger that would trigger the verb amar, to love, to be in the past subjunctive. Si tú fueras más grande, can you tell what verb this is? I used an irregular and I probably shouldn't have right off the bat. But si tú fueras más grande, it's fue, it's the verb ser. This is how the verb ser looks in the past subjunctive. Si tú fueras más grande, sería posible. Punto. Sería posible. It would be possible, whatever the it is. Si tú fueras más grande, sería posible. Si yo I'm going to use the verb ganar. Si yo ganara, if I won, si yo ganara la lotería, compraría, this is the conditional tense, where you take the whole infinitive, comprar, and put ia on the end. That's the would tense. So that means I would buy. Compraría una casa grande. Le gustaba que ellos llegaran, the verb llegaran a tiempo. Okay, so he liked that they arrived on time. Not at a particular time, because if they were talking about a particular time that he liked that they arrived on time, it'd probably be le gustó, like it pleased him in that moment, but it says le gustaba. So probably the llegaring, the arriving on time, was probably also a habit, and it was a habit that this person liked it too. So it's probably something that happened habitually. Or you could say le gustó. It pleased him in the moment. Que ellos llegaran a tiempo. So again, the verb wouldn't change, but this sentence has a slightly different meaning. It pleased him that they arrived on time, and them arriving on time is probably talking about one particular time. And it's all just because of the gusto versus the gustaba, because there are not preterite and imperfect versions of the subjunctive. Okay? And lastly, let's do si ella comiera, if she ate, si ella comiera el veneno, ella moriría. She would die. Ella moriría. Si ella comiera el veneno, ella moriría. She ate the venom, she would die. Or the poison. So those are some examples of the past subjunctive. And remember, it has two uses. It has an if use. So here we used an if, here we used an if, here we used an if. So if it happened, you would use either of these two endings. Or if you're using a subjunctive sentence where the verb is in the past. And so you'll start to see some of these sentences come up. And in fact, como si fuera is in a recent story that we just did. And that's as if so-and-so were. As if someone were. Como si fuera. Now, there are some irregulars in this tense, and you can kind of tell that if they're irregular in the preterite, if the verb is irregular in the preterite, like the verb ser, for example, is fue, it's going to be fuera. The verb querer is quiso, quise, quisiste, quiso in the preterite. Typically, we don't use that. Usually, if we're using wanted in the past, we're using the imperfect form, quería, querías. So we don't often use this, but it's probably good to remember it because this would be quisiera in the yo form and in the la usted form. What are some other ones? Poder, the verb to be able to. What's that in the preterite? Pud, right? And so it would be pudiera. The verb poner, it's pus, so puse, pusiste, puso in the preterite. It's an irregular, so it's going to be pusiera. Pusiera, pusieras, pusiera, pusiera, pusiéramos. Decir is another one that's irregular. It's going to be dij, dije, dijiste, dijo. So it's going to be dijera, dijera, dijeras, dijera. So these are just some of the common irregular verbs that are irregular in the preterite. Oh, I should give you one more. Sorry, the verb haber, the verb to be. So this is actually the verb I, or the word I. There is. In the past tense, we say había, right? There was había. And we don't really ever use the preterite. In fact, I don't think the preterite really exists. But if it did, it would be ube, ubo. So, but we do need this, even though this is kind of like, it doesn't really exist. We do need it because hubiera. So the way to say if there was something, si hubiera means if there was something. Okay, I know there's more, but I'm going to stop here for now and give you your homework assignment. Your homework assignment is to come up with 6 sentences that use a past subjunctive verb. 6 sentences of your own. Make them be about you or about other people in the class. So make them be kind of interesting. I'd like you to do 3 of them with ifs and 3 of them without ifs, just as past versions of the subjunctive. And you may also choose to use some irregulars in there as well. Let's have you do at least one irregular. One irregular, it can be whichever kind of sentence, the C sentence or the subjunctive sentence, doesn't matter. And that is the end of this lesson, although what I would do is point you to, if you use an if sentence, you're probably also going to want to use a conditional verb. So that's yet another tense. So again, conditional verbs are pretty easy. It's the entire infinitive the entire infinitive with ia. And there's no difference between AR or ER verbs or IR verbs. So comeria, hablaria, bailaria, viviria. So viviria is I would live, or he or she would live. So if you use C, pair with a conditional. And the conditional is just the would tense, the tense that says would, would. I would do something, or somebody would do something. All right, that is your homework. All right, buena suerte. Let me know if you have any questions.